Welcome to According to Sam, folks. This is episode 288. Happy Friday. Thank you for joining me. I hope you guys have had a good week. I'm going to get right into today's podcast because I have a lot to share with you. And we're going to start today with a couple of passages from the Bible. And that's going to kickstart our discussion today. The first passage that I want to focus on is a proverb. This is from Proverbs 6, starting in verse 12. And I'll read. A worthless person, a wicked man, walks with a perverse mouth. He winks with his eyes. He shuffles his feet. He points with his fingers. Perversity is in his heart. Talking about a wicked man, a worthless man. He devises evil continuously. So to devise evil means that he's planning. This wicked heart of this evil, worthless person he's thinking about evil. How can he do evil continually is what he's thinking about. He sows discord. This is the one I want to focus on today. That the wicked, worthless man, according to this proverb, he sows discord. And what does that mean that he sows discord? Oh, I get rid of this. I wish I hadn't done that. Okay, there we go. He sows discord. Therefore, his calamity shall come suddenly. Suddenly, he shall be broken without remedy. So he sows discord, the wicked man. And I was thinking about this, and I started to think about Ephesians 6. And Ephesians 6 is Paul's letter to the church at Ephesus. And this is a very, famous passage. Many people know this passage where Paul talks about putting on the armor of God, and that our struggle in life is not against flesh and blood. He says right here, for we struggle not against flesh and blood, but against rulers, against the authorities, against the powers, against the powers of this dark world, and against spiritual forces of evil in heavenly realms. That we're not fighting against flesh and blood, but we're fighting against these evil powers of darkness in the heavenly realm. And then Paul says, therefore put on the full armor of God, so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground. And after you have done everything to stand firm. And then he talks about the armor of God, and he uses the armor of a Roman centurion and the armor that they wear. And he has an analogy for each piece of armor that the Roman centurion wears, that he brings back to what it means to put on this spiritual armor. He says, stand firm with the belt of truth buckled around your waist, the breastplate of righteousness, and with your feet fitted with the readiness that comes from the gospel of peace. The gospel of peace, that this is part of the armor that Paul talks about that you should have against the wicked, evil forces of darkness, those who sow discord. That you should that the righteous person, the person who is righteous and who is battling in this spiritual war on the side of righteousness, then he has his feet fitted with the readiness that comes from the gospel of peace. Now, another phrase that is used for Jesus in the Bible is the Prince of Peace. The Bible talks many times about the righteous person. The good person is a person that tries to make peace, to try to bring peace to any situation, and not a person that sows discord. Sowing discord is different from bringing peace. The word sows is a word that is synonymous with planting. It's a farming word. When you sow seeds, the seeds are not the discord. The seeds are only the what become the roots of the discord. And then from the seeds, the discord, the war, let's call it war. The war starts after the seeds for the war have been sown. And when you put the seed in the ground, you don't even see what's going on underneath the surface of the ground as this seed is becoming a plant, and then it grows, and then it starts pushing up out of the ground when you first see what the seeds have brought. And then you start seeing the plant grow, the plant of discord, the plant of war. But the plant of war starts with the seeds. It starts with the people that sowed the seeds of discord. The wicked person, the wicked man, the worthless man who sows, the wicked man that devises evil continually sows the seeds of discord. Now, when the plant comes up, the discord or the war, when the war starts and you're seeing the war and you're seeing what's happening and you're like, okay, these two sides are fighting. One of these sides has to be responsible for starting the war. One of these sides has to be responsible for the war. But the real person that's responsible is the evil person that devises evil continually, the person that sowed the seeds. Even if the person that sowed the seeds is not one of the two parties fighting against each other, they're responsible because they sowed the seeds for war. They sowed the seeds for discord. And then let's just read the last part of this proverb, this portion of the proverb, 16 through 18. It says these things, that people who tell you that God is all about love and God doesn't hate and God doesn't ever hate anything, you can take them right to Proverbs 6, where it shows you the things that God hates. It says in this proverb, these 6 things the Lord hates. Yes, 7 are abomination to him: a proud look, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked plans, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked plans, feet that are swift in running to evil, false witness who speaks lies, and one who sows discord among brethren. All right, so we were talking in the last podcast about the $36.5 trillion in debt, and I was explaining to you how we got, starting to explain to you how we got in this much debt, and I'm going to go further into that today. And it may take me a couple more podcasts to really tell this story of how we amassed $36.5 trillion in debt. And it wasn't by accident, as I told you in the last podcast. And if you remember in my last podcast, I was sharing with you the premise that I have before we get into this discussion. And I'm going to reiterate that premise. And my premise is there is a correlation between peace and prosperity and war and debt. That this, you're going to see when we start telling this story, a lot of this debt came from war debt. But first, we're going to talk about the last time that we had a balanced budget and that we were at peace and how we benefited from that peace and the country was prosperous because of that peace. And then we started going into debt when we went back into war. I'm going to tell you all that story. But first, I want to get into what's going on now with this conflict and the back and forth between the United States and what's going on with Ukraine, because Donald Trump has, no matter what you may think about him, his past, whatever, I mean, this guy has shown himself as someone who is seeking peace. He's not out sowing discord. He's not out creating war. He's been very, very vocal, and his actions and the things that he's done has shown him to be a person that is trying to achieve peace. Now, the big debate this week came out about, because Trump said that Ukraine started the war in Ukraine. No, Ukraine didn't start the war in Ukraine. And people were like, that's ridiculous to say Ukraine invaded themselves. But Trump didn't say that Ukraine invaded themselves. He's talking about who started the war. And he said that Ukraine shouldn't have started it. Ukraine was part of what started it, but Russia didn't start the war. I'm sorry. The people who sowed the seeds for discord, the people who planted the seeds for this war are who started the war in Ukraine. And who did that? Talk a lot about the Bush-Clinton dynasty in this podcast. We were talking in the last podcast about the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991 under George H.W. Bush. And under the George H.W. Bush administration, that's when Germany was admitted into NATO. And the George W. Bush administration told Russia that if they dissolve the Warsaw Pact and they allow Germany into NATO, that NATO would not move any further east beyond Germany. This guy, he lied. George H.W. Bush lied. And then they said that they didn't make that agreement, but it's in all the notes, and they absolutely made that agreement. Bill Clinton did the Budapest Memorandum. Orange Revolution was under George W. Bush, and he supported Yanukovych. Yanukovych was, or Yushchenko is who Bush supported. Yushchenko was associated with the West. His wife went to the same university that Barack Obama was a constitutional professor at University of Chicago. Viktor Yushchenko's wife is American, went to University of Chicago, and during the Orange Revolution, that's who Bush supported. Who sowed the seeds of discord? Who sowed the seeds for the war in Ukraine? It was this man. Under the Obama administration, the Russia may have invaded Ukraine, but why did they invade Ukraine? People are using the word unprovoked over and over again. Well, Russia invaded Ukraine unprovoked. That's ridiculous. Nothing could be further from the truth. They were very provoked. Who provoked them? Who sowed the seeds of discord? Who sowed the seeds for the war that then grew into the war? No, Ukraine didn't start the war, but they were part of it. They allowed themselves to be used by this man and his administration to sow the seeds of discord. It's ridiculous what's going on right now. And Donald Trump is trying to make peace. And while he's trying to make peace, you see from both sides, I told you that Donald Trump trying to achieve peace, he's going to get the most pushback from his own party. And he's getting pushback from his own party now that he's trying to make peace. He's getting pushback from the war party too, the Democratic Party. But this is New York Post. This is Rupert Murdoch here this morning. This is a dictator because Trump said that Zelensky, because he has suspended elections, they haven't had elections since 2019, that he looks to be a dictator, and everybody got upset about that and said, no, Vladimir Putin's a dictator. No, Vladimir Putin was elected last year. They had elections last year. And yes, Vladimir Putin has been president going back to 2000, but how many terms did FDR serve? I mean, who cares? If the people support him, and it seems that the Russian people do support him. I haven't seen anything that said that a majority of the Russian people don't support Vladimir Putin, but they're calling him the dictator. And this came out in the New York Post today. It's really fascinating watching this because all of these Republican senators are coming out and they're angry, but they can't really show that they're angry. Some of them, like Senator Tillis and what's his name from Mississippi, have come out and spoke. Well, Putin is a KGB officer. Putin is a vicious killer. We can't trust Vladimir Putin. Well, your constituents don't feel that same way. Your constituents don't. And it doesn't matter what the people in the Senate and the people in Congress say. The reason Donald Trump is president and J.D. Vance, who voted when he was in the Senate, voted against more aid to Ukraine. I remember when Donald Trump picked J.D. Vance as his running mate, all the war hawks were upset and like, oh my God, I can't believe that he picked J.D. Vance, because that showed that Trump was by picking J.D. Vance, who voted against Ukraine aid in the Senate, that he is doubling down. And everybody's like, well, Donald Trump is Putin's puppet. He's doing Putin's will. Like I said, Putin's been there since 2000. Putin's been there for 2000. What was George W. Bush's relationship with Putin? What was Obama's relationship with Putin? Trump's doing Putin's bidding. Trump's Putin's puppet, the dictator's puppet. Oh, really? Oh, really? What was Obama's relationship with Vladimir Putin like? Look at this. What was Obama's relationship with Vladimir Putin like, people? He's doing Putin's bidding because he's trying to make peace, is what they're saying about Donald Trump. Donald Trump was pretty chummy with the ex-KGB officer, the dangerous Soviet Russian that we can't trust. This guy was pretty chummy with him. The guy who sowed the discord. This is George W. Bush. Vladimir Putin is a dictator. Vladimir Putin is ex-KGB officer. We can't trust him. Well, Bush trusted him pretty well. Bush had a great relationship with him. Look at this. Look at this. Look at this. I love the other narrative too. Oh, Ronald Reagan is turning in his grave. What would Ronald Reagan think, is what they're saying as they're sowing discord, as they are being roadblocks to peace. Ronald Reagan turning in his grave. Well, George Bush had a pretty chummy relationship with the ex-KGB officer. Look at this. Look at this. He's a dictator. The ex-KGB. What would Ronald Reagan think? This guy's father served under Ronald Reagan as his vice president. Look at this. Look at this, people. KGB. Russian. Can't trust him. Ronald Reagan. Turning in his grave. These people are sowing discord. These are wicked, wicked people. I love this. This is this event that in Sochi that Bush was at with Vladimir Putin. This is George Bush. This is Vladimir Putin right here in this event that they did in Sochi. Look at Putin up there having a good time. Everybody's having a great time. It's awesome. I'm glad you guys are able to get along. We should get along with Russia. I want to get along with Russia. I'm glad that George W. Bush was able to go to Sochi and have a little dance party with Vladimir Putin. I think that's great. Let's not forget Obama on the hot mic with Dmitry Medvedev in 2012, promising the KGB officer, promising the dictator, Vladimir Putin, more flexibility after I'm not accountable to the voters anymore. After I don't have to run for re-election anymore, then I'll have the leeway to do more of what the dictator, what the KGB officer wants me to do. I promise that Vladimir Putin, that after my election, I will have more flexibility, Dmitry. And Dmitry says, okay, I will transmit this information to Vladimir.
My last election, yeah. After my election, I have more flexibility. Yeah, I understand. I transmit this information to Vladimir.
I transfer this information to Vladimir for you, Obama. Obama didn't know that he was on a hot mic. Obama thought he was having a secret conversation with Dmitry Medvedev. And he says, after my re-election, I have more flexibility to work with the KGB officer, the dictator. And then don't forget that Obama's the one who did the Russian reset. And that's another narrative that they want people to think, ignorant people who don't know that the Soviet Union does not exist anymore. That the Russian history goes back to the 7th, 8th century. Russian history goes back, and for a small period of time in Russian history, in the 20th century, the Russians were communists. During the time of the czars, they were Christian, Orthodox Christian. They were not communist in the time of the czars for hundreds of years. In this one period, within the century of the 20th century, they're communists, and they're not communists anymore. The Soviet Union, it had fell. It dissolved. There's no more Soviet Union. And the Obama administration, realizing that in 2009, they went to Russia and said, we want to reset our relationship. We realize that you're not the Soviet Union anymore. We realize that you're not communists anymore, and we want to reset our relationship. This is Hillary Clinton, the then Secretary of State, speaking for the Obama administration.
Our time here together, I wanted to present you with a little gift which represents what President Obama and Vice President Biden and I have been saying.
This is what President Obama and Vice President Biden and I have been saying about you, Russia. We want to reset our relationship.
Obama and Vice President Biden and I have been saying, and that is, we want to reset our relationship.
Reset our relationship. So all this talk about Ronald Reagan turning in his grave and the Soviets and the KGB and all that stuff, I don't want to hear anything about that. Because we reset, under the Obama administration, we reset our relationship with Russia in 2009. So I don't want to hear anything about the Soviets anymore. The Soviets are gone. The KGB's gone. I don't want to hear anything about that, about Ronald Reagan turning in his grave. I don't care anything about that. I want to know, what did Russia do between 2009, when the Obama administration reset our relationship with them, to now that they have to be our big enemy, that they're the most existential threat to America? What happened between 2009 and now to take this relationship that we had reset and that we had mended and made it an adversarial relationship again? So much so, this is our biggest geopolitical enemy. What happened between 2009 and today?
So we will do it together, okay?
Thank you very much.
You are very welcome.
Glad that you recognize that Al-Qaeda.
And then this is Obama in 2012 in the debate with Mitt Romney. Remember what he said. Now, Obama is caught on a hot mic promising Putin more flexibility after this election. Obama does the Russian reset. Nobody says, oh, Obama, you're Putin's puppet. You're doing the will of Putin. You're using Putin's talking points. The KGB officer is manipulating you. You are his tool. Nobody said that about Obama when he was promising Putin more flexibility, when he was doing the Russian reset, when he said this in the debate with Mitt Romney.
You recognize that Al-Qaeda is a threat, because a few months ago, when you were asked what's the biggest geopolitical threat facing America, you said Russia. Not Al-Qaeda, you said Russia. In the 1980s are now calling to ask for their foreign policy back, because the Cold War has been over for 20 years.
The Cold War has been over for 20 years. The Cold War has been over for 20 years, and the 1980s is calling, asking for their foreign policy back. Barack Hussein Obama. All this talk about Ronald Reagan, that was the 1980s foreign policy. That was the Soviet Union. I don't care about what Ronald Reagan is doing in his grave. I don't care. The Cold War's been over for 20 years, is what Obama said. Nobody said that he was appeasing Putin. Nobody said that he was a KGB operative or a puppet of the KGB mastermind. Putin's the KGB mastermind. He's manipulating Trump. Nobody said that he was manipulating Obama.
Geopolitical threat facing America, you said Russia. Not Al-Qaeda, you said Russia. In the 1980s are now calling to ask for their foreign policy back, because the Cold War has been over for 20 years. But, Governor, when it comes to our foreign policy, you seem to want to import the foreign policies of the 1980s, just like the social policies of the 1950s and the economic policies of the 19.
That was Obama. Nobody said, Obama, what are you doing? Don't you know that Vladimir Putin's a dictator? Don't you know, Obama, that he's a former KGB officer? Nobody said that. Nobody said that at all. I love this meme. It's been going around, and it's got up in heaven. This is in heaven, and they got their hand out to Zelensky saying that you're next. That all the other people that the United States dictators that the United States use while they were useful to the United States, and when they were no longer useful to the United States, and like we talked about in the last podcast, like Saddam Hussein, throughout the entire 1980s, we supported Saddam Hussein with arms when he was fighting Iran. We gave him everything we need. He was our ally throughout the fight. When he was not useful to us anymore, or in the same way that he was useful to us in the 1980s, we figured out a way to goat him into sow the seeds for him to attack his neighbor Kuwait, and then we clutched our pearls and said, "Oh my God, he's attacking Kuwait." No, you told him to attack Kuwait, or at least you gave him the green light to attack Kuwait. And this is Manuel Noriega. We used him. We used Osama bin Laden in Afghanistan. While he was useful to us, he's not useful anymore. Gaddafi, we used him while he was useful to us. And I love this meme. It's like you're no longer useful to us anymore, Zelensky. You're next, buddy. So now we're getting stuff like this that are being put out, and everybody's can't believe that the United States is turning their back on Ukraine, our ally. And the facts of the matter is that, particularly in the Republican voters have not supported this war for a long time. A lot of Democrats, they're ignorant. They don't know what's going on, and they're they eat up mainstream media. Whatever the mainstream media tells them, they eat it up like candy. So a lot of them, I mean, they just see Russia invading Ukraine in 2022, and they think the war started in 2022, and they don't know anything about the seeds, the seeds of discord that were sown back in 2014. So of course a lot of them support Ukraine, but in the Republican Party, Republican voters, despite what Republican representatives in the House of Representatives and Republican members of the Senate, despite what they say, the Republican voters do not support the war in Ukraine and have not supported Ukraine for a long time. So it looks like, well, the United States is turning their back on Ukraine now, but not really. We're not turning our back on you. A lot of us haven't supported you for a long time. And the politicians that are on the grift, who are getting the money from the defense establishment in Congress, they've supported you, but they haven't been reflecting the will of the people. The Republican voters were so angry when Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, did finally pass the last package to Ukraine that he passed, because we were angry because the entire reason that we went and we voted for Republicans, and it was one of the main reasons that Republicans won the House of Representatives in 2022, is because we sent them there with the mandate to end Ukraine funding. Republican voters do not want another dime going to Ukraine. And then Mike Johnson, he held on to that package because they had passed it in the Senate. He held on it for a long time, but everybody knew that he was going to pass it. And Republican voters felt betrayed when he passed that. And so the point I'm trying to make is that the American people, particularly Republican voters, have not supported Ukraine for a long time. So we're not turning our backs on you. The politicians, now they're the ones that support you. And it took us some time to find but to elect a politician that was going to support the will of the people, which Trump is doing. Trump is supporting the will of the people. And yes, he has a different policy towards Ukraine than Barack Obama, than Joe Biden. Trump has a totally different policy, but Trump's policy lines up with the American people. The policy of Barack Obama and the policy of Joe Biden don't. And that's why they're gone and why Trump is president right now. We put Trump in office to end this war. You're getting people putting out messages like this. I guess this guy is a Ukrainian fighter, and he says, America, I have a question for you. You chose Donald Trump as your president, and today your president picked up the phone and called the world's number one terrorist. Well, was he the number one terrorist when Bush was dancing around with him and Obama was, promising more flexibility, but he's the number one terrorist now. So you guys chose President Trump. He picked up the phone and he's trying to negotiate peace now because the Biden administration, for 3 years since this war has been going on, the Biden administration has had a policy that they wouldn't even pick up the phone and negotiate. They wouldn't even open up the lines of diplomacy with Russia. So this guy, Ukrainian fighter's mad that we picked Donald Trump, and today your president picked up the phone and called the world's number one terrorist, not to demand justice, not to hold him accountable, but to talk, to negotiate, to treat him like a legitimate leader. Yeah, he is a legitimate leader. He's a leader of one of the 5 members, permanent members of the Security Council that has the largest nuclear arsenal in the world. What are you talking about? How are you not going to treat him like a legitimate leader? What's wrong with you people? So tell me, how do you feel about that? We feel good about it. The people who voted for Trump to negotiate peace, to bring peace, we feel great about what he's doing. I personally do. Would you have accepted a president that called bin Laden after 9/11? Well, we're going to talk about 9/11 and bin Laden as we get further into these series of podcasts and talk about how we created $36.5 trillion of debt. Would you, but to answer your question, bin Laden was our asset for a long time in Afghanistan. We supported bin Laden and the Mujahideen and Al Qaeda in Afghanistan to fight against the Russians. Just give you a little bit of that. Would you have justified sitting down with ISIS? Obama armed ISIS. Obama armed ISIS in Syria and then said they were a JV team when they came back across the border and took over Iraq. Because that's exactly what just happened. Okay. I buried brothers because of Putin. I've seen civilians executed, children crushed under rubble, entire families wiped off. Yeah, it's war. This is what happens in war. And yet Trump, your leader, just gave that monster a seat at the table. Yes, if you want peace, then yes, Vladimir Putin's got to have a seat at the table. If that's what we want. We want peace. We want to end this war. So the only way to do that is to open up diplomacy with Russia, which Biden refused to do. So sorry that you're upset about that. For 3 years, Ukraine has been fighting for survival, standing on the front lines of freedom. American people have stood with us. No, the American politicians have stood with you. The American defense establishment has stood with you. The American people have not stood with you. The American people have not supported this, particularly Republican voters. We've not. We've wanted an end to this for the past since it began, quite frankly, but Republican voters have not supported you. I'm sorry. And we're the ones who elected Donald Trump to end this. The American people have stood with us, and I will always be grateful for that. But now your president, the president that we elected, the president that is fulfilling the will of the people who elected him. So sorry you don't understand that Donald Trump didn't just seize power in the United States. He was elected with the mandate to end this war. But now your president stands with our enemy. Well, that's your neighbor. Why is he your enemy? You guys made them your enemy. And the Obama administration sowed the seeds. We're going to get further into this. So I'll ask you again, America, how do you feel about that? I feel good. I'm glad. Donald Trump's doing exactly what I elected him to do. Why don't you go talk to Europe? Do you know that look at the headline here. Look at the date of this too. This just came out this week. February 18th, 2025. This just came out this week. France 24. EU imported more Russian LNG in 2024 despite drop in gas consumption. What does it say? Europe's gas demand dropped 11 to an 11-year low in 2024, with imports of liquefied natural gas declining 18%. So this is the usage. The consumption of LNG dropped to an 11-year low in 2024. And despite the consumption of LNG dropping in 2024 by 11%, however, imports to the EU, imports of Russian LNG to the EU increased by 18%, with France, Spain, and Belgium sourcing most. So France, Macron, you guys are still buying Russian gas? Spain, the EU, you guys are still buying Russian gas? And this guy's crying over the president of the United States trying to negotiate peace now? And how does this make sense that the EU is still buying up Russian gas and then they're mad at, but why are you buying up Russian gas from the dictator? EU, France, Belgium, Spain? Why are you guys buying up Russian gas, putting money in his coffers? Why are you doing that? Get serious, people. This is ridiculous. This is ridiculous. Let's get into some clips. People are saying that Donald Trump is, and Vladimir Putin, or not Vladimir Putin, Zelensky said it outright that Donald Trump is being fed disinformation and misinformation. That Donald Trump is using Putin's talking points, and Donald Trump is he's fallen the victim of the mind control, the mind control of this KGB officer that he knows how to do mind control. That's what the KGB was skilled at, doing mind control of people, bringing people under their control with their mental, they stare at goats tactics. Well, this is Donald Trump's new HHS director. He's in Donald Trump's cabinet. And I want you to listen to what Robert F. Kennedy Jr. says about the Ukrainian war and how it started. The war did not start in 2022 when Russian tanks crossed the border. It didn't even start in 2014 with Euromaidan. It started before that with the seeds that were sown for discord. That's what started this war.
This is a war that should have never happened. It's a war the Russians tried repeatedly to settle on terms that were very, very beneficial to Ukraine and us. The major thing they wanted.
This is it. And I love it. I love this video because as he's saying what's going on, whoever made this video, they show images and pictures that are evidence for everything that Kennedy's saying. They're going to show the documentation to support everything that RFK is saying. So this is the Minsk agreements. Vladimir Putin's there with Zelensky when Vladimir Putin is there trying to negotiate a peace deal there in Minsk. Look at who's here. This is Macron. This is the president of France who's still buying up all the Russian LNG. They're all there. They're all there.
Terms that were very, very beneficial to Ukraine and us. The major thing they wanted was for us to keep NATO out of the Ukraine. The big military contractors want to add new countries to NATO all the time. Why? Because then that country has to conform its military purchases to NATO weapon specifications, which means certain companies, Northrop Grumman, Raytheon, General Dynamics, Boeing, and Lockheed, get a trapped market. In March of 2022, we committed $113 billion. Just to give you an example, we could have built a home for almost every homeless person in this country. We then committed another $24 billion since then, 2 months ago, and now President Biden's asking for another $60 billion. But the big expenses are going to come after the war, when we have to rebuild all the things that we destroyed. Mitch McConnell was asked, can we really afford to spend $113 billion to Ukraine? He said, don't worry. It's not really going to Ukraine.
It's going to American defense manufacturers.
Now listen to this. The military, this is what Eisenhower said, that we need to guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence by the military industrial complex in Congress. And this was the case that Mitch McConnell made on the Senate floor for why we need to continue this war, is because the money wasn't going to Ukraine. The money was going to Ukraine, but the money was coming back to the United States and to the United States coffers. So for the profit motive, for money, that we need to keep this war going. Wicked people that sow discord, shed innocent blood. The Lord hates 7 things: hands that shed innocent blood, and one who sows discord. So this is what Mitch McConnell was saying, that we need to get, and he wasn't the only one saying this. A lot of them were saying this. We need to keep the war going because the money was coming back to us, was his motive. And that's what Kennedy's talking about here. And then I love how they showed the clip while he's talking of Mitch McConnell actually saying that on the Senate floor.
He said, don't worry. It's not really going to Ukraine.
It's going to American defense manufacturers.
So he just admitted it's a money laundering scheme. And who do you think owns every one of those companies? BlackRock. So Tim Scott, during the Republican debate, said, don't worry, it's not a gift to Ukraine, it's a loan. So raise your hand if you think that loan's ever getting paid back. Yeah, of course it's not. So why do they call it a loan? Because if they call it a loan, they can impose loan conditions. And what are the loan conditions that we impose on?
Joe Biden said it. Joe Biden, that's one of those famous videos of Joe Biden at the Council on Foreign Relations with Haas sitting right there next to him. And he says that I went to Ukraine after the Maidan coup, and I told them that we were going to do another loan guarantee from the IMF. And I told him, if you don't fire the prosecutor that's looking into my son in Burisma, if you don't fire him, then you're not going to get this loan guarantee from the IMF, $1 billion. And I'm going to be leaving tomorrow, is what Joe Biden says in this video. Just admits it. I'm going to be leaving tomorrow. Prosecutor's not fired by tomorrow, you're not getting the loan, is what Joe Biden says.
Why do they call it a loan? Because if they call it a loan, they can impose loan conditions. And what are the loan conditions that we impose on? Number one, an extreme austerity program, so that if you're poor in Ukraine, you're going to be poor forever. Number two, most important, Ukraine has to put all of its government-owned assets up for sale to multinational corporations, including all of its agricultural land, the biggest single asset in Europe.
It's a loot job.
1,000 years of war fought over that land. It's the richest farmland in the world. It's the breadbasket of Europe. 500,000 kids almost, Ukrainian kids, have died to keep that land as part of Ukraine. They almost certainly didn't know about this loan condition. They've already sold 30% of it. The buyers were DuPont, Cargill, and Monsanto. Who do you think owns all of those companies? BlackRock. And then in December, President Biden gave out the contract to rebuild Ukraine. And who do you think got that contract? BlackRock. So they're doing this right.
And the thing about that too is that Biden's number one advisor was Mike Donilon. Mike Donilon was Biden's number one advisor. And understand what Kennedy's saying here, that Biden gave these contracts for Ukraine to BlackRock. This is Biden's. This is Biden's number one advisor right here. Michael Donilon is an American attorney and a campaign consultant and a longtime advisor of Joe Biden, the 46th president. So Mike Donilon's brother is the chairman of BlackRock, Thomas Donilon. Thomas Donilon, the American former business executive, former government official who served under Obama. He is now chairman of BlackRock. BlackRock, 11.5 trillion in assets under management. BlackRock. So that just to give you some more insight into what Kennedy's saying here, that Joe Biden did a giveaway to BlackRock, and it had to do with Ukraine and their natural resources.
They've already sold 30% of it. The buyers were DuPont, Cargill, and Monsanto. Who do you think owns all of those companies? Yeah, BlackRock. And then in December, President Biden gave out the contract to rebuild Ukraine. And who do you think got that contract? BlackRock. So they're doing this right in front of us. They don't even care that we know anymore, because they know that they can get away with it. And how do they know that? Because they have a strategy. And that strategy is an old strategy, which is they keep us at war with each other.
That's it.
They keep us hating on each other.
That's it. And Donald Trump wants to bring peace. And like I played in the last podcast, that he says that he wants to cut this by 50%. 50%. This was in 2021. Right now, our defense budget is $1 trillion. If you notice that the only enemies on this list of, what do you have here? 8 countries. These are the 8 countries that spend the most on military. 5 of these 8 are allies, strong allies. Russia spent $65 billion in 2021. China, just under $300 billion in 2021. $800 billion is what we spend in 2021. And like I said, our defense budget now is $1 trillion. So why doesn't India have to spend that much on defense? Why doesn't England, who's our ally, India is our ally, why don't they have to spend that much on defense? Why doesn't Britain, the UK, have to spend that much on defense? Why doesn't France have to spend that much on defense? Why doesn't Germany have to spend that much on defense? Because if any of these guys get in trouble, who are they going to call? Who are they going to call? So we subsidize their defense spending. We subsidize their defense spending by spending so much in defense. And Donald Trump says he wants to cut this in half. And I told you that, you know who doesn't like that? Military-industrial complex. And military-industrial complex, if Donald Trump is serious about bringing peace, and he's serious about sowing peace and bringing the world together and having a Russian reset, just like Obama did. Why is it okay for Obama to do a Russian reset in 2009, but Trump can't reset our relationship with Russia right now? But if Trump's serious about doing this, like I was saying in the last podcast, then he better be careful. He better make sure that the security team around him is strong. They've already tried to kill him a couple of times. And that's what they did to RFK's uncle when he wanted to make peace. RFK's uncle tried to make peace with Russia in the 1960s and tried to put an end to the Cold War in the 1960s. And we see what happened to him, to RFK's uncle. And I want to tell, I have a little bit more time. We're not going to get back into Bill Clinton in this podcast. We'll pick it up on Monday. But I want to tell the story about how RFK's uncle, JFK, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, how he tried to make peace in the early 1960s and what the military-industrial complex, what the defense establishment did to RFK's uncle for trying to make peace and end this this hustle of the military-industrial complex on the American people. And it starts with the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Cuban Missile Crisis was the closest throughout all of the Cold War, from the end of World War II to the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991. And all of that time, the closest that we came to nuclear war, the closest that we came to full-on hot war with Russia during the Cold War was in 1962 during the Cuban Missile Crisis. I have a clip about it. Let's watch this clip.
It's not hard to imagine a world where at any given moment, you and everyone you know could be wiped out without warning at the push of a button. This was the reality for millions of people during the 45-year period after World War II, now known as the Cold War. As the United States and Soviet Union faced off across the globe, each knew that the other had nuclear weapons capable of destroying it. And destruction never loomed closer than during the 13 days of the Cuban Missile Crisis. In 1961, the U.S. unsuccessfully tried to overthrow Cuba's new communist government. That failed attempt was known as the Bay of Pigs, and it convinced Cuba to seek help from the USSR. Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev was happy to comply by secretly deploying nuclear missiles to Cuba, not only to protect the island, but to counteract the threat from U.S. missiles in Italy and Turkey. By the time U.S. intelligence discovered the plan, the materials to create the missiles were already in place. At an emergency meeting on October 16, 1962, military advisors urged an airstrike on missile sites and invasion of the island. But President John F. Kennedy chose a more careful approach. On October 22nd, he announced that the U.S. Navy would intercept all shipments to Cuba. There was just one problem. A naval blockade was considered an act of war. Although the president called it a quarantine that did not block basic necessities, the Soviets didn't appreciate the distinction. In an outraged letter to Kennedy, Khrushchev wrote, "The violation of freedom to use international waters and international airspace is an act of aggression which pushes mankind toward the abyss of world nuclear missile war." Thus ensued the most intense 6 days of the Cold War. While the U.S. demanded the removal of the missiles, Cuba and the USSR insisted they were only defensive. And as the weapons continued to be armed, the U.S. prepared for a possible invasion. On October 27th, a spy plane piloted by Major Rudolf Anderson was shot down by a Soviet missile. The same day, a nuclear-armed Soviet submarine was hit by a small depth charge from a U.S. Navy vessel trying to signal it to come up. The commanders on the sub, too deep to communicate with the surface, thought war had begun and prepared to launch a nuclear torpedo. That decision had to be made unanimously by 3 officers. The captain and political officer both authorized the launch, but Vasily Arkhipov, second in command, refused.
You understand what happened? That this submarine became very close to launching this submarine that was in the Gulf of America. This submarine became I think they were in the Gulf of America. They may have been in the Atlantic, but they were set to launch a nuclear missile right off the coast of the United States. They were set to launch. They were below the water, didn't know what was going on, didn't have communications, and they were set to launch a nuclear missile at the United States, which would have started nuclear war between the United States and Russia. And a lone individual in the sub declined to approve the launch and probably saved the world. This individual Russian.
By 3 officers. The captain and political officer both authorized the launch, but Vasily Arkhipov, second in command, refused. His decision saved the day, and perhaps the world. But the crisis wasn't over. For the first time in history, the U.S. military set itself to DEFCON 2, the defense readiness one step away from nuclear war. With hundreds of nuclear missiles ready to launch, the metaphorical doomsday clock stood at 1 minute to midnight. But diplomacy carried on.
But diplomacy carried on. The people that wanted peace, the people who wanted to talk to Khrushchev, to talk to the Russians, to work out a way to find a peaceful settlement. That's the only way that they prevented nuclear Armageddon, is because of diplomacy.
Stood at 1 minute to midnight. But diplomacy carried on. In Washington, D.C., Attorney General Robert Kennedy
Robert Kennedy, John F. Kennedy's brother, the father of RFK Jr., Robert Kennedy, the Attorney General, is the one who secretly opened up lines of communications with the Russians, and he's the one who got talks to settle down, to de-escalate what was going on with the Cuban Missile Crisis. Robert Kennedy
met with Soviet Ambassador Anatoly Dobrynin. After intense negotiation, they reached the following proposal. The U.S. would remove their missiles from Turkey and Italy and promise to never invade Cuba in exchange for the Soviet withdrawal from Cuba under UN inspection. Once the meeting had concluded, Dobrynin cabled Moscow, saying time is of the essence and we shouldn't miss the chance. And at 9 a.m. the next day, a message arrived from Khrushchev announcing the Soviet missiles would be removed from Cuba. The crisis was now over. While criticized at the time by their respective governments for bargaining with the enemy.
Bargaining with the enemy! That's what they're saying about Trump right now. That he's bargaining with the enemy. That I can't believe that this is what the media is saying. This is what the people in Congress are saying, the war hawks who want the war to keep going, those who are sowing the seeds of discord, those who don't mind the shedding of innocent blood, that they're in the media speaking behind Kennedy, speaking behind his back, saying that he's sold out to the enemy. He's sold out to Khrushchev. He looks like a coward because he's trying to make peace, because he doesn't want a nuclear war. That's what the press was saying about Kennedy when he negotiated with Khrushchev in 1962. Same thing going on with Donald Trump right now, with the media, with all the hawks that want the war to continue. This is what's in the media right now. Same thing was going on in 1962.
While criticized at the time by their respective governments for bargaining with the enemy, contemporary historical analysis shows great admiration for Kennedy and Khrushchev's ability to diplomatically solve the crisis. But the disturbing lesson was that a slight communication error or split-second decision by a commander could have thwarted all their efforts, as it nearly did, if not for Vasily Arkhipov's courageous choice.
So that's what happened in 1962. And because of the Cuban Missile Crisis, that's when the red phone was created, where it would open up lines of communications, direct talks, direct diplomacy between the President of the United States, John Kennedy, and Khrushchev. So that opened up these lines of communications between the United States and Russia. And from there, Kennedy sought to make peace with Russia after the Cuban Missile Crisis. And he does this famous speech that I mentioned in the last podcast in June of 1963 at the University of America in New York. And he's calling for peace. This is a public address, a commencement speech that he's giving, but it's a public address to the United States, to the Russian people, that we want peace. We want to end the Cold War now. Here in 1963, we don't need to carry this war out for another 30 years. Let's end the Cold War now, is what Kennedy was calling for. June 10th, 1963.
Yet it is sad to read these Soviet statements, to realize the extent of the gulf between us. But it is also a warning to the American people, not to fall into the same trap as the Soviets, not to see only a distorted and desperate view of the other side, not to see conflict as inevitable, accommodation as impossible, and communication as nothing more than an exchange of threats. No government or social system is so evil that its people must be considered as lacking in virtue. As Americans, we find communism profoundly repugnant as a negation of personal freedom and dignity. But we can still hail the Russian people for their many achievements in science and space, in economic and industrial growth, in culture, in acts of courage. Among the many traits the peoples of our two countries have in common None is stronger than our mutual abhorrence of war. Almost unique among the major world powers, we have never been at war with each other. And no nation in the history of battle ever suffered more than the Soviet Union in the Second World War. At least 20 million lost their lives. Countless millions of homes and families were burned or sacked. A third of the nation's territory, including 2/3 of its industrial base, was turned into a wasteland, a loss equivalent to the destruction of this country east of Chicago. Today, should total war ever break out again, no matter how, our two countries will be the primary target. It is an ironic but accurate fact that the two strongest powers are the two in the most danger of devastation. All we have built, all we have worked for, would be destroyed in the first 24 hours. And even in the Cold War, which brings burdens and dangers to so many countries, including this nation's closest allies, our two countries bear the heaviest burdens.
So, 5 months after giving that speech, Kennedy was shot in the face in Dallas. And I believe there's many reasons why they killed him, but I believe the major reason is because he wanted to end the Cold War and he wanted to make peace with Russia. So I say to Donald Trump too, please pursue peace, but please be careful. We'll get back into this on Monday. I hope you guys have a great weekend, and I'll see you on Monday.